And joining me now is Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening to you, Diane.
Good evening to you.
We've heard Vladimir Putin make this rare admission that Russia is struggling with fuel shortages, with gas station queues in the wake of Ukraine's strikes. Diane, is he saying the quiet part out loud, that he's worried Russia is in deep trouble?
Well, I don't think he's worried. I don't think he cares. But it's interesting that if he has said these things. But, you know, it's pretty obvious now. The Ukrainians done a brilliant job of taking the war inside Russia with long-term bombing. And now they're going to do even more of it because I have a piece today that says that they have the capability now to launch ballistic missiles, which are going to be devastating when they start hitting Russia in a few months. So, you know, the gasoline is not working. Crimea, nobody can go to holiday there. So it's become, and smoke is rising over the skylines of the cities. It's very embarrassing for him. And it's good that he is acknowledging that.
I guess the question is, with the NATO summit in Ankara less than 2 weeks away, are we seeing the simple ebb and flow of war, or is this a real turning point in Kyiv's favour? What's your read?
Well, I think the ballistic missiles will be a game changer. Once they're going, you can't detect them, and these are the missiles that are hitting Ukraine, and they go way up out of the atmosphere, and they fall down at unbelievable speeds and carry big payloads and create all kinds of trouble. And they're going to get their own back now. Drones have been effective. Canadians now have mastered the drone technology, but now they've got the ballistic missiles, and that's going to be a game changer. And I think that that's going to hopefully help Trump and everyone else get Putin to the table to talk about some kind of ceasefire.
Now, speaking of leaders descending on Turkey, you've previously told me that this will be, quote, probably the most important NATO summit in its history. I'm curious, given Donald Trump came with fire in his belly last year on defence spending, could this one actually end up the opposite, maybe even boring, and might that be good news for the alliance?
That would be very good news for the alliance. Look, he's got to understand that Europeans are starting to put up a lot of money for their own security, and that, you know, his scolding has been working throughout the NATO alliance. And, you know, on the other hand, he's very upset because he believed that NATO should have also come to his assistance in the Hormuz Straits against Iran, when in actual fact, it's an alliance to protect the North Atlantic countries. It's not an alliance to back adventurous wars in other parts of the world. But, you know, that's Trump, and he always pushes as far as he can. And I think it'll be very good. And also, there was an excellent sideline meeting between Zelensky and Trump at the G7. And Trump is now talking about, calling Zelensky courageous and encouraging them to do more. So I think that things are kind of looking good in terms of trying to get Putin to stop.
So you think this will be a good summit for Ukraine? Because there's some that are worried that, well, Ukraine will be pushed down the agenda given what we're seeing in the Middle East.
No, I think that, you know, Trump has more or less, he thinks the war in Iran has ended, although it keeps being resurrected here and there. He's got his team working on it, and he's actually looking forward to changing the subject because he's got midterm elections coming. It's an electoral thing. People are not happy with the Iranian situation. And now if he believes that he can turn the page and get involved and get Putin to the table and get some kind of ceasefire there, that's going to be a very big victory and an easier task, I think, than just dragging on with this Iranian thing.
We've spoken much on this program about Ukraine's hopes for NATO membership. You yourself have talked about Ukraine being more of an asset than a burden to the alliance. Is NATO membership off the cards as long as Donald Trump occupies the White House?
I don't think it is at all. I think that NATO has to, as I've said on your program, and it got carried all over the world, as I said, you know, NATO needs Ukraine and Ukraine needs NATO. and the United States needs NATO as well.
But can Donald Trump be convinced of that?
Well, he hasn't pulled out, has he? Remember, he also can't unilaterally just change his mind and pull out. To leave NATO would require congressional approval. And, he hasn't got a lot of congressional approval on a lot of issues, and he certainly would get nowhere with any attempt to try and pull out of NATO. It's not doable at this point.
I want to ask you on the flip side of this, because the United States has continued to and ah over its European troop deployments. Many regard President Trump as being favourable to Vladimir Putin. Is NATO membership even worth it for Ukraine? Is it worth the political will and effort?
Ukraine needs NATO like it needs oxygen, and NATO needs Ukraine like it needs oxygen. There is really no choice here. These are neighboring regimes up against an evil empire called Russia, and a megalomaniac in charge of a nuclear arsenal. There is just no question in anybody's mind about, and this kind of bickering and dickering is something that plays into Putin's hands. And so I think that it's just absolutely essential that they get it all get their act together. And by the way, the U.S. Congress understands this.
Given Russia's threats, I want to end with NATO's eastern flank. There are again those warnings that Russia is preparing a so-called provocation in the Baltic states or Poland to test the alliance. How seriously, Diane, do you take such reports right now at a time where Vladimir Putin appears to be under pressure, appears to have his back against the wall and may feel like he needs to retaliate?
Well, I think there already have been testing. They've already been playing around in the Baltics, in the Scandinavian areas, and elsewhere. Iran, for instance, recently said it accidentally fired something that landed in Turkey concerning its war. And, Turkey was in a position to actually invoke Article 5 over that and didn't, because they accepted the excuse that it was an accident. What I'm saying is they're testing, and they're trying to demoralize the belief in NATO for any reason. But, you can't declare war over small things like this. And yes, I think he will, but, they've got to, at this summit meeting in Turkey, they have got to come up with something between what they're doing now and an all-out Article 5 invocation, which means immediate war. They've got to come up with an interim thing. If there's an interim problem, what can they do? And they've got to push back.
We're running out of time, but crucially then, and you and I have often spoken about this here on World News Tonight, do you believe that if the alliance was really tested seriously today, Russia would be deterred or emboldened?
Who was tested?
If Russia seriously tested the NATO alliance, do you believe that Vladimir Putin would be deterred or would he be emboldened?
Well, I think if, for instance, they invaded Estonia, I think there would be a real problem. I think there would be enormous cataclysmic consequences, military, quasi-military, and diplomatic. That would just be an absolute step too far.
Diane Francis, always a pleasure. Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, thank you for your time.
Anytime.
And that's all for World News Tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more news and analysis. I'm Dahmen. Good night.